Have you ever wondered what it's like to live at the absolute limit of human survival? Well, we're about to take a journey to a place that does just that. This is Oymyakon, Russia, the coldest permanently inhabited place on the entire planet. We're going to dive into how a community can possibly function and even thrive in conditions this extreme.
So let's just start with this number, because it's at the heart of everything. Negative 71.2 degrees Celsius. That's a staggering 96.2 Fahrenheit. Just try to wrap your head around that for a second. It's an unofficial temperature recorded back in 1924, and it's a level of cold that's almost impossible to imagine.
And that, of course, brings us to the big question. How? How is it even possible for hundreds of people to live here, day in and day out? We're going to unpack the science, the incredible human ingenuity, and, maybe most importantly, the very uncertain future this one-of-a-kind place is facing.
To understand how people survive, you first have to understand why it gets so mind-numbingly cold in the first place. And it turns out Oymyakon's geography creates what you could call a perfect recipe for cold.
It's not just one thing, you see, it's a whole cocktail of factors. First, it's way up north, and it's at a pretty high altitude, so that gives it a cold head start. Then, it's incredibly far from any ocean, so there's no warmer sea air to moderate the temperatures. But the real secret ingredient, the real kicker, is its topography. It sits at the bottom of a valley. And that valley creates this really interesting weather phenomenon called a temperature inversion. Now, normally, the higher you go, the colder it gets, right? Well, in Oymyakon, it's the exact opposite. The cold air is super dense, so it literally sinks and pools at the bottom of the valley, where it gets trapped by a layer of slightly warmer air sitting on top.
You can almost picture it as the village being submerged at the bottom of a giant, invisible lake of freezing air. It's so profound that if you were to walk just 100 meters up the side of the valley, the temperature could be 10 degrees warmer. It's wild.
Now, Oymyakon does have a rival for its Pole of Cold title, a nearby town called Verkyansk. And while they've both posted unbelievably low official temperatures, Oymyakon's unique geography, with that higher elevation and deep valley, makes its winters more consistently and severely cold. And a little context here is absolutely key. Sure, research stations in Antarctica and Greenland have seen colder days, but those are temporary outposts for scientists. Oymyakon is different. This is a real, permanent village. It's home, and that's what makes it so extraordinary. Okay, so we know why it gets so cold, but how on earth do people actually live there? Surviving this kind of cold requires a level of ingenuity that is just astonishing, and it starts with the very ground beneath their feet. The entire region is built on something called permafrost. Now, this isn't just frozen dirt. Think of it like a layer of rock-solid frozen concrete made of soil, ice, and rock that has been frozen for at least 2 straight years. The problem is, if it ever melts, it turns into a soupy, unstable mess, and anything built on top of it will just collapse. So how do you build a house on that? Well, the solution is simple, but it's absolutely brilliant. You don't build directly on the ground. Instead, you drive these deep concrete piles into the permafrost and then build the house up on stilts. This lets that freezing winter air flow underneath the building, which keeps the permafrost frozen solid and the foundations stable. Genius. But that same permafrost creates a massive problem for modern life. Things like running water or sewer pipes, forget it. You can't bury them because they'd freeze solid in an instant. And if you tried to heat them, you'd melt the permafrost and destroy the whole town's foundations. So what's the result? Outhouses are still the norm. Getting around is another huge challenge. For car owners, the most common strategy is going to sound absolutely insane. They start their car in the fall, and they just don't turn it off again until spring. It runs 24/7. Because if you shut it off when it's -50, all the fluids will turn to sludge, and you'll have to get towed to a heated garage just to thaw it out. A normal car wouldn't stand a chance. Every single vehicle has to be heavily modified just to function. We're talking double-glazed windows so you can see, special blankets to insulate the engine, even heaters for the fuel lines. These aren't fancy add-ons, they're basic survival equipment. This incredible resilience, this toughness, it starts from a very young age. Think about what temperature it takes to get a snow day where you live. In Oymyakon, elementary school kids are expected to go to school until the temperature drops below -52 Celsius. And for the older kids in high school, it's even more extreme. They have to keep going to class until it hits -55. That really puts into perspective what normal means when you live in the coldest town on Earth. Now, the story of survival in Oymyakon is built on a foundation of unbelievable suffering. The only reason this town is even accessible today is because of one of the darkest chapters in Russian history. The only way to get to Oymyakon by land is on the R504 Kolyma Highway. This road wasn't built by choice. It was built by prisoners of Stalin's gulags, forced to work in these horrific, deadly conditions to create a path to the region's rich gold deposits. The human cost was just staggering. The road earned the nickname the Road of Bones because it's estimated that for every single meter of road they built, one person died. And because digging graves in the frozen permafrost was impossible, the bodies of the dead were often just buried right there, in the foundation of the road itself. For generations, the single greatest challenge in Oymyakon was fighting the cold. But now the community is facing a new and deeply ironic threat. The region is getting warmer, and the permafrost that has defined their entire existence is starting to thaw. And this isn't some distant threat. It's happening right now. The Arctic is warming up almost 3 times faster than the rest of the planet. Oymyakon's average annual temperature has already risen by more than 2 degrees Celsius, and the consequences are profound. So what happens when that frozen ground starts to melt? Well, the very foundations holding up their homes start to crack and fail. Bizarre new disasters are cropping up, like zombie fires that burn underground through the winter only to reignite in the spring. And maybe the scariest of all, scientists worried that the thawing ground could release dormant diseases like anthrax from animal burial sites that are over a century old. And that brings us to a final and pretty urgent question. The people of Oymyakon became masters of surviving extreme cold. They conquered an environment that most of us can't even fathom. But now, can they survive a world where the very ground beneath their feet is literally melting away?